Hello, my name is Pete Saronis, and I'm excited today to continue our discussion with my colleague Tony Vicinelli of Enlight. Enlight, the DSIM software and IT management trailblazing company, both inside and outside the Beltway. And we're going to talk a little bit today, continuing our discussion from our prior series webinar kickoff about how to de-risk the data center. We're going to talk about the data center as a piece of critical infrastructure, as a facility that's not just ping power pipe, but also really the epicenter for a business and organization, and the value of the data and the information that resides inside of that data center that needs to be protected, curated, but also shared and displayed for decision-making purposes. So with that, again, my colleague is Mr. Tony Vicinelli, Federal Technology Director, official title, for the DSIM software company, Enlight. I'm Pete Saronis. I'm the former Chief Technology Officer for the U.S. Departments of Energy as well as Education. I love data centers. I'm a geek at heart, and you're going to hear some great stories and anecdotes from my sidekick here, Tony, and the two of us just like to wax a bit about this topic and hopefully educate, inform, and enlighten you in the process. So with that, Tony, we've titled this seminar, or at least this series, De-risking the Data Center. For our audience and what we hope they glean from this, what does that mean to you as a company that, obviously provides world-class software, but really what does de-risking a data center mean? And then we can get into some of the weeds of that title.
Yeah, I think that, when you talk about de-risking the data center, you're really talking about having a greater understanding across all of your compute infrastructure, all of your IT infrastructure, the IT services that you're delivering, right? So it's not necessarily in the past, you thought of the data center as this brick and mortar, this building that was out somewhere that we visited, every once in a while, people out there are working and keeping it running, right? It is different than that now, right? It means a number of things. It means a number of services that you're in charge of, responsible for, that provide IT services to your customers and internally. And I think the reason why it has become so important to de-risk the data center is that the cost is so high for the services you're providing are so valuable, not just from a financial standpoint, right? So, you've heard numbers like a data center outage is, on average will cost an organization $700,000, right? Of any length, right? It will cost $700,000. So your data center is critical infrastructure. Your data center is a high value asset, and your cloud assets also live in a data center, right? They might not be yours, but they do live in a building somewhere that is a data center. So being able to understand what that is, what that means, the visibility that you have, the control over those, all play into this part of how do I de-risk from that standpoint, right?
Okay, so let me glean a couple things from that as we kind of go back and forth. And again, for our audience, we're gonna really like to dispel myth. We like to always do that in terms of what it is, what it's not, right, Tone? And we mentioned early on about there's protection of data, but there's also the facility itself. There's a physical component of this infrastructure which deems it critical. And Tony, if I can just offer this up to our group, that the federal government deems 16 sectors in our country, dhs.gov, if you go out there, you'll see which sectors those are. But these are the sectors whose assets, systems, and networks, whether physical or virtual, are considered so vital to the United States that their incapacitation or destruction would have a debilitating effect on security, national economic security, national public health or safety, or any combination thereof. I was reading that off the website. But, that in and of itself, the energy sector, the transportation sector, Tony, the water sector, they depend on technology. They depend on data centers. Heck, they depend on the cloud. So I just wanted to elaborate that what you brought up was incredibly important, that cloud's involved with data centers, people are involved with data centers. That's as right. Well as the data itself. So any thoughts on that as you mentioned the critical infrastructure component?
Yeah, absolutely. So you hit the nail on the head. It's not only reducing risk because it's important to you being a data center manager, somebody's responsible for keeping things reliable and uptime, but it's important to who relies on you, right? It's important to your customers
Mm,
and the services that hang off of the data center.
great
Right? So the
point.
data center and the applications that you traditionally think of, oh, it's housing our our Outlook, it's housing, or our cloud service provider is housing Outlook. But now in a in a data economy, right? Those data centers are supplying APIs and full data services to other companies that rely on them, right? And so an outage not only means that that I might not be able to get into my email or get into my particular application, but all other applications that hang off that have APIs that are talking into data services that are in the data center in the cloud are now affected. And so I have to take that into consideration whenever I'm thinking about the overall risk that is involved. What is the overall loss or the effect of an outage?
Yeah, question for you, Tony.
Yes.
I'm thinking, so you speak a lot to federal agencies, state and local agencies. You speak to commercial folks. I know you have federal in your title, but we've talked a lot about best practices in the commercial sector, and Enlight is doing wonderful things on both sides of those sectors, meaning public and private. Something comes to mind where when you're talking to a customer, an existing or a maybe customer, how important do you feel that you have to steer, is important that you steer the conversation to? You're not just buying a piece of software that you're going to put in a cloud, but the information, the data, the stuff that you call a high value asset. Does the conversation get to that, or do you have to kind of force the issue? Because I could imagine sometimes your company's value proposition is more than just a state-of-the-art software platform. I mean, do you get to speak like this, or are you hoping to do more of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do get there sometimes, right? As far as the actual, whenever we're talking about an implementation, but then there is that next step, right? That more mature step of what is the full understanding or the full scope of what I'm able to learn about myself. Myself is my data center, right? And
Yes.
and when I say my data center, right, it's all digital infrastructure that might be under my purview, right? So it might be my on-prem data center, my co-location facility, my cloud service provider, and how do I look at optimizing across all of those different platforms. And the best way to do that, right, is to have visibility and data that's giving me information, actionable intelligence that I can then, that I can then respond to, right? I can drive decisions off of. So, we talk about this concept of optimally placed IT assets, optimally placed IT workloads, meaning that all things considered, if I consider risk, or I consider privacy, and I consider cost and reliability and uptime, where should different IT services run? Where should they live? Sometimes it's, on a given day or a given data set, it should live locally. Other things might be able to be pushed to the cloud or are optimally placed in the cloud because that's the best place for them to run, or the best place where they have some level of redundancy. The only way I can make those decisions is being able to have a clear understanding of the telemetry that's coming out of the data center, the total cost of the IT asset, what that ownership might be, to be able to make those decisions.
So okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did, and that's
Okay.
where I'm going to kind of jump in here and talk about layperson Joe Sixpack, who's hopefully watching this, Joanne Sixpack. There's a lot to consider, and I heard in my listening mode that there's a cloud strategy. There's stuff that could probably be an on-prem strategy, on premises, right? Not everything moves to the cloud, right? I think you talked in our last segment about, what data should be in a cloud, what should stay close to home to protect, whether it's personal identifiable information, et cetera. But data backups, replication, recovery, all this stuff that, feel free to kind of reference back to that wonderful data center optimization initiative, which every federal agency is bound to and should be investing in tools like DSIM tools, et cetera. But it's beyond the actionable intelligence, right? It's also, what am I supposed to do with that? So strategically, Tony, when you're talking to a customer and a mandate comes out, how do you take the what I call that gearhead speak and talk to the data center itself as this really is that heartbeat? right? This is the place where it all converges. And can you speak to some of the type of dashboarding that can come out of that? Because at the end of the day, if automation is there to not replace jobs, but to enable a workforce, can you speak to some of that value proposition? I think that's important beyond the technical components.
Yeah, I mean, I think that those are important conversations to have, right? That to get to, out of the, the kilowatt per hour, the kilowatt, the amperage talk of a data center, and start to realize that it is a line of business, right? That you will have people understand that this is an important part of, it is a business unit, right? As opposed to just like you were saying, the ping power and the pipe and the gearhead speak.
Well, what kind of information are you finding, I guess, that agencies are benefiting from by having some of the data, I'll call it output from beyond power and efficiency and so forth? What are, just speak to some of that actionable intelligence that you referenced.
Yeah, as you're going through, maybe what your cloud migration strategy might be, right? Or how that you're managing all these different assets. What we're finding is that people are starting to rationalize their applications. Rationalize being not just, do I need it or not, right? Do I need this? Do I have extra licenses or something like that? Which is important, right? That's an important step to take. But is this something that can be moved to the cloud? Is it cloud optimized? Is it something that will never be moved to the cloud because of its sensitivity? Those are really interesting conversations that you start to see. And again, data that comes out, dashboards that come out that say, not only an understanding of, what the software is, but where does it live? Where could it be optimized? I'm seeing a lot of conversations like that. And we try to provide all of the plugins necessary, not just plugins into, like I mentioned, power, but then integrations with the ability to, to do change to those applications or understand where they're running physically. Are they virtualized, and can they be moved to the cloud?
So let's pivot to then off of your application rationalization, which again, for those listening, I mean, I like to think of it as, what do we have? What do we still need? What do we need to retire? And what do we ultimately need to invest in? And rationalizing, okay, so I think Tony, you and I both agree that's a key component before you even consider jumping to some cloud service provider or something like that, or at least it's a part of the strategic approach, right?
Yeah, and sometimes, I'm sorry, but sometimes what I hear, and I'm curious to your feedback on this as well, where I would say that this problem becomes, right, if you don't have at least eyes on, or the ability to start to gather some of this information being like application, just a full asset inventory, a true asset inventory of what do you own, right? These types of things. The ability to, or the question of how do I de-risk my data center, sometimes the default answer I've heard, right, as I go out, is like, well, we're moving to the cloud, and I'd be curious, as a former CTO, what would you say, or what would your response be to somebody that's like, here's how I'm going to de-risk, I'm going to move to the cloud?
Yeah, so, okay, thank you, throwing it back at me. I think of wearing that hat, and I'm fortunate in my business today to help kind of companies think about things. I was sold to for 20 plus years in the federal government, and I've seen many a pitch and how everybody's going to solve our problems. And a lot of the time it was, do you even know what my problems are? Do you know my challenges? Do you know that, yes, while there's a DCOI, I have a different mission, and maybe some of my information that I at the Department of fill in the blank have to protect in a different way or a different manner. So number one, it starts with that dialogue. And knowing you and having heard and shared with you about some of those experiences, I think that knowing the mission when you're doing technology due diligence on the federal side, how do you align that when somebody like Tony Vicinelli shows up at your door, and you kind of bridge that gap? But I think business intelligence queries, what's the data that if I do leverage cloud and leverage a tool like an Nlight, what is it I want to see? I, the federal thought leader, as the C-suite, as an operations manager, as somebody who's in the cyber shop. And two, I'm all in on cloud. I mean, I was all in on cloud when Vivek Kundra came out in 2009 and said, this can be, paraphrasing here, the key to an organization's path to innovation. but cloud was scary to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And now we went right from, data center, whatever the first, excuse me, but I'm forgetting now. There was DCOI was the follow-on to some other prior.
Oh, the FDCCI.
Yeah, whatever that acronym.
Yeah.
It was like, get used to the cloud, what it is, and then think about it. And then we had, it was that cloud first.
Cloud,
So now it's cloud smart. And I think I gleaned that from you is be cloud smart. Know what you want to use that data center for, but recognize it's probably not a bad infrastructure for that 24/7, infrastructure play, and then put the data, the information that you've talked about agencies are pining over, not just to meet compliance.
Yeah,
but to distill and say the hygiene of my organization is healthy. That's my long-winded response. So thanks for throwing it back at me. What do you have to say to that?
Well, no, I think what you're talking about there, when you start to get those goals identified, you have a level of confidence, right, in how to respond or what the outcome is of gathering all this data, right? You have an idea of, well, sometimes, right, it's the risk that you know about, right, you can tolerate, right? You can say, I know about this level of risk and I assume it. And so, that then I can respond, right? But not knowing those things, the risk that you don't know, right? The risk that you can't plan for, then you have other fail safes put in place, right? This is my failover. This is my redundancy plan for the things that are like out of left field, like a pandemic, right? Oh, I lost your sound, Pete.
Geez, forgive me. Technical. Something touched this little pad here. Sorry about that. I was listening. I was trying to jump in, but maybe that was a message to keep your mouth shut for a minute, Pete. So Tony, some of the stuff you're talking about, AI, machine learning. Okay, so for those of us who are like, ooh, I want to adopt AI, machine learning, can you talk a little bit about how that has helped evolve you and your company to provide more? Because I always hope that companies that I invest in, both in government and now in the industry, is they're constantly evolving their product. Where's that on your tech roadmap? AI and just the integration.
Yeah, first, it's at the forefront, right? We're able to gather so much information. This is AI in general, right? You're able to gather so much information that a human being can't possibly spot the patterns that are going to be emerging from that data. So the predictive ability of AI to tell me, look, based off of everything that I've seen over the last year, the AI is saying this, right? To say, based off of everything that I've seen, you are going to be having a power spike in the next hour, right? You're going to be having a temperature spike in the next hour based off of the workloads that are running, the things that I see from the past. You look at companies like Watson or IBM Watson, they bought the Weather Channel, right? Yeah. So the Weather Channel, they're bringing that whole data set in to say, the heat, the humidity, you're going to be having an issue here based off of all the things I've seen in the future. Now I can respond to it. Same thing for anomalous activity, right? What weird thing might I see that an alert or alarm that's going off? Should I freak out about it, right? What should I respond to? Or what is something that is that is benign, right? And so those things get better and better with the more data that you can put into them. And they're not necessarily the beauty of the AI and machine learning is that it will start to learn and spot patterns as opposed to a human being saying, these are things I want you to look for. That's data analysis, which is important. But AI is, let me spot patterns that you, Mr. Human Being, would not recognize and present them to you as, is this important to you?
Yeah, no, well said. And again, that was a wonderful exemplar of doing analysis using the human brain, which we're not eliminating. It's important, but I consider being able to garner insight from that machine learning capacity that is so important as we move into not just cloud, but Tony, we're tracking to the federal government, the federal data strategy, the digital transformation. Everything's being automated, or at least attempting to be, and then to share information in a safe and secure manner. I loved your prescriptive analytics where it's in constant learning mode, so that maybe the human in the loop isn't alerted chasing down some log report, but it has what he or she needs to make a decision to leadership. Okay, so question. Here's a thought, and just wax on it. So it's not a seated question, but in one of the articles I was reading about, with all of the titles in government today, chief this, chief data, chief information, chief tech, chief, I don't know if that's the same in your organization, but I read about a data protection officer recently as somebody who, you know, has to focus on where is the data and how do we protect it. Just off the top of your head, what's your initial thought on, it's not so much about the title, but a role. Are you seeing some roles evolve as a result of the dependence on the cloud and technology, so that someone or some unit of an agency has to start looking at data differently?
Yeah, I mean, I like that idea. You know, I don't like a chief protection officer, chief data protection officer, something like that. In the past, right? I came originally had come from a cybersecurity background, right, and so actually database security background, and so when I think of that, right, it's like, oh, I don't want to lose my data, right? But when we think about what that protection officer's other role might be, is, do I have access to the data services, right, that might be provided by the data center? So not so much of a loss, like a data loss, like it's gone. It's more of, do I have access, or is there a service denial of either from human error or from some nefarious activity that I'm not able to access it? So just as an example, right, maybe a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Pete, you and I are both from the DC, Washington, you know, the Virginia, Maryland area. Yep. The AWS out in Virginia, they had an outage that was caused by human error, right? And you think about, they were doing some maintenance, and it was a mistyped command that removed access to, they were basically trying to get rid of their S3, like some of their servers, and they removed a larger amount, right? They just moved them offline. Well, what the effects of that were, you think about all the people that are supported, all the companies that are supported by those instances. You've got, I mean, you could start to just go down the list of the top, you know, Forbes 50, and you would have them there in that data center. And they lost access to the API services that were being provided by those, you know, by that AWS instance. I mean, that is what a data protection officer hopefully would have some interest in.
Or a team of, right?
A team of, exactly.
No, that's good. Let me riff off that for a second. So, you know, you're bringing up or not ancillary, but actual use cases of things that can happen. And look, we said de-risking the data center at the outset, not eliminating risk, right? There's always risk, right? And you hit on some great points about, you know, information at the fingertip, you know, it reduces risk to that, you know, the hygiene and certain things. Maybe if there's a little bit of not a word breach, but if some device that isn't controlling all the financial systems, but, you know, got kicked and it's, you know, power went off, well, we can plug it in and people are still able to do what they need to do. And then others in that rationalization of applications, which I think is part of that strategy, is, you know, for all the tools that the government's investing in for its cloud solutions and stuff, you have to do a lot of due diligence. So let me.
And I'm sorry, and I bring that AWS example up specifically because it's non-traditional. It's non-traditional for a data center outage, but it is what it is. That's what it is to the customer that relies on those services, right? It is a data center outage. It might not be their physical data center, like you think of a UPS or you think of going down, right? UPS outage. It's a human error that affects my data center.
Yeah, so I'm going to shout out to you just because you're part of the community. I've had the fortune in my post-federal career to be leading a lot of efforts around smart, secure cities and communities. And a lot of the excitement around the coolness factor of, ooh, cars connected, solar panels connected, street lights connected. I always have to, and I love doing it, as I talk about the technology underpinning and how the data center and the infrastructure and the information that traverses the data center is what allows those Internet of Things, those industrial Internet of Things to be connected. So I want to say that a lot of our dialogue here today, and for those listening, is, data center information management solutions, the data center as a piece of critical infrastructure. It is that. It's critical. It needs to be up because, as Tony just mentioned, you flip a switch on, you want light to come on, electricity. You want to turn on the hot water, it better be there. Power, right? The roots of a data center, power management's important. And correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't your roots at Enlight start in that power management, and then it's evolved now into this sort of information treasure trove platform?
Yeah, I mean, we started at, where basically where the industry started, right? Where, there were data center managers that just needed better visibility outside of just the regular VMS system that just told you kind of where the temperature was. But how do these things relate together, and how do they relate to the IT assets, right? So you had two silos, you had two groups that were needing to talk across one language, right? One place where they could translate the problems that each of them were having. So the IT group and the facilities group needed to be able to work together, collaborate, and that's where kind of what we were born out of. Now that's evolved into what is essentially, like, for lack of a better term, a data center OS, right? You've got to understand, I need to call upon the data that is available, or the relationships that are part of not only my physical data center, but then how do they relate to the other things that are non-traditional data centers?
Okay, so now I have throwing it at you. You're talking about correlation of data, absolutely, mashing up, making sense, learning, no doubt, and a lot of tools say we do that. So Tony, talk to me and the audience about how your dialogue with the federal government, you can call out an agency if you want in a good way, or not, but keeping it agnostic. When you go into meetings, I would imagine it's usually, well, you hope to get that meeting with the CIO, or it seems like that's the logical role. The correlation you've brought up is you've talked about data officers, human capital, financial systems, CFO come to mind. How many of your meetings include many chiefs? And if they don't, what would be an ideal meeting for you at a kickoff session? Because I think government needs to, and hopefully if they're watching, understanding it's not just an IT matter. There's a human operational mission component, right? And that's hard when you're selling software to Uncle Sam.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're seeing is, so I'll break it into two things. The initial meetings, right, are the people on the ground, people that are like, I'm responsible for making sure that this thing stays up and running and efficient. But then as you look at what are the additional benefits to having a platform like that, all of a sudden these other interests, it becomes very apparent the other interests are going to sort of bubble up the chain, right? And things that people that would be most interested in it. So my ideal meeting, if I could design that meeting and lay out what the benefits are by having this discussion of sort of the information that we're gathering important to the CIO, but then also have the CFO there and have that understanding of and now, like you're saying, there's all these different hats now. Even chiefs, the risk officer in there as well, right? To be able to understand that. So why are we spending twice as much to have this redundancy? Well, the risk officer is there to be able to say, well, no, don't take that away. We need that, right? So those three folks, right, are the data that we can provide gives information that will be helpful for those folks to make good decisions.
Yeah, and I think because we did this in some of our just shooting the breeze prep for this, is the chief information security officer, the chief security officer. Again, you asked me a question early on. I'm just looking back at my little notes I wrote down since you were talking, that how do we protect the data and how do we want to use the data? Those are questions that you can ask a CIO, but then that CIO, as good as he or she is, especially in government, most will tell you our mission. I'll just call out the DOE. The DOE is a $30 to $35 billion agency with an incredibly vast, disparate, diversified mission. National Nuclear Security, Office of Science, R&D, intelligence, power utilities, and then all the other regular commodity stuff. And I just think to add on top, and those of us who are listening, include as many of these chiefs, because they're all going to have a perspective on what data needs to be protected, how it's protected and used. So, all right. So, Tony, we're getting to the parting shot, because we can obviously wax, and this isn't going to be the only conversation. We're going to keep building, just like everybody should be continuously working on protecting their data center and those assets. What is something you want to leave from these folks, theming it around de-risking a data center, but really just what comes, right off the top of your head that you want people to take away from today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if I could sort of summarize, right, to say that the ability for you to have a level of confidence over all of these seemingly, different aspects of how you're delivering IT services, right? It comes from being able to gather the data, being able to define goals for your digital infrastructure, right? And that it's not traditional anymore, where it's just in the data center or it's just in the cloud. We need to have a conversation about what our goals are as an organization, and how do we do that. Let's have those conversations with the background of actionable intelligence that's available to us. That the data center, the cloud, these are sensor rich, data rich environments, and so the data is there for us to be able to go and get, to be able to have a good conversation. So,
all right.
So go out and get it, right?
Yeah. So I was drawing a picture. I love those illustrators when you're giving speeches that do this incredibly gifted.
Oh yeah.
So I drew one while you were talking, but I'm not going to show it to anybody, but I'm going to describe it because it was awesome, but my picture sucks. But it's a pyramid. And at the base is that technology. And somewhere in the middle is the people and the process, right? The business process, which I know every enterprise architect out there is probably like, yes, people, process, technology, it all has to work in unison. I look at it as like a pyramid, right? The technology is the underpinning foundation. It's not the hard and problem. It's usually a human component. That middle layer, people and process. But the top is, to me, I'm writing down customer, client, smart infrastructure. The data center is the pyramid, but at the top, if you want the applications to your actionable intelligence, I think it was beautiful. And if Fenlight decides to use that as a picture, then I think it would be worth 1,000 words. So thank you, Tony. I'm gonna, I think we have some information coming up here on screen for folks for further information kind of thing. But I'm excited. I learned a lot from you, Tony. I always do. I'm looking forward to our next series, and hopefully our audience will join us, and we'll just continue the dialogue. So thanks again, Sal.
I love it, Pete. I look forward to it. Thanks.
Okay, awesome.